In this video, we'll discuss a story that occurred in Pennsylvania, U.S., in 2014 when 33-year-old Jessica Paget left work to send a fax and never returned. Her family filed a missing persons report, and CCTV footage helped solve the case. What happened to Jessica was so shocking that the jury refused to watch the video evidence presented by the prosecutor at the trial. Jessica was born on December 15, 1980, and spent her entire life in Pennsylvania. She was an energetic and cheerful child. Her parents, Thomas and Danelle, divorced when she was still young. Soon after, her mother remarried, and Jessica considered her stepfather as her second father. After graduating from high school in 1998, she attended college to study preschool education. During her time in college, Jessica met a man named Michael Paget. They began dating and eventually lived together. Over the course of their 8-year relationship, they had 2 children and got married in August 2014, just 4 months before Jessica disappeared. Some sources also claim Michael had a son from a previous relationship. Despite the usual ups and downs in their relationship, Jessica was happy with Michael. She worked at a kindergarten in Northampton, where she enjoyed her job because of her love for children. The children, in turn, adored her and shared a mutual bond with her. On November 21, 2014, Jessica took her older children to school and brought her younger son to the kindergarten where she worked. It was a normal day until Jessica asked to leave work to send a fax from her mother and stepfather's house, which was in a rural area near Northampton. Her administrator granted her permission, and Jessica left by car, leaving her son at the kindergarten. She was expected to return within half an hour, but never came back. Her colleagues grew concerned when she didn't answer her phone and informed Michael, who also couldn't reach her. Worried, Michael contacted Jessica's mother, Danelle, who was in Florida, but she hadn't heard from her daughter. Danelle became anxious as it was unusual for Jessica not to answer her phone. She urged Michael to contact Jessica's stepfather, Greg, but Greg hadn't seen or spoken to her either. The family's worry increased, and Danelle immediately booked a flight to Pennsylvania. 4 hours after Jessica left work, Michael filed a missing persons report, stating that Jessica would never have left her children willingly. The police quickly launched an investigation, distributing Jessica's description to nearby stations. Jessica was 5'4", weighed 130 pounds, had a footprint tattoo on her shoulder, brown hair, and hazel eyes. She was last seen wearing gray sweatpants and a black hoodie with Duck Duck Goose on the front and Staff on the back. Local hospitals and morgues were checked, but there was no match. Jessica's colleagues were interviewed, and they all described her as having no enemies, loved by both children and parents. She appeared normal when she left work at lunch, showing no signs of distress. 2 hours after the report was filed, the police tracked Jessica's phone signal, which led them to a parking lot about a mile from the kindergarten. Jessica's white Subaru Outback was found there, unlocked, with her purse, documents, and phone inside. The keys were still in the ignition, but there were no immediate signs of foul play. To gain more insight, the police reviewed CCTV footage from a store near where Jessica's car was found. The video showed her parking the car, getting out, and standing at the driver's door for a while before walking away and disappearing. The footage gave no further clues, and investigators were puzzled as to why Jessica would leave her phone, documents, and car behind. Jessica was last seen walking between 2 buildings toward another parking lot, where she disappeared from view due to a lack of cameras. There was a small and old monitor in the store where the investigators watched the recording. Hence, they made a copy of the video to watch at the station on a modern and big screen. The Northampton Police Department was small, so they had to ask the Pennsylvania State Police to help organize the search. They distributed flyers with Jessica's image throughout Northampton and nearby cities, and through the media and social networks. Detectives from the state police began to restore the chronology of events preceding the disappearance of Jessica. The first thing they did was talk with the kindergarten staff one more time. After learning that Jessica left work to send a fax from her mother's house, the detectives went there hoping to find answers to their questions. This house was about 4 miles from the kindergarten, meaning it was a 10-minute journey. Upon arrival, the detectives talked to Danelle and her husband Greg, from whom they learned that Jessica had keys to the house and could come at any time. On the day of her disappearance, Donnell was in Florida, and Greg wasn't home either. Every sent fax appears in the device's usage history, but as it turned out, Greg's fax machine was faulty, so it was unclear whether Jessica was at her mother's house that day. Perhaps she decided to use another fax machine. However, it doesn't explain why she left her belongings in the car. Next, the detectives decided to talk to Jessica's husband, Michael. He said that on the day of his wife's disappearance, he was the first to leave the house. A friend picked him up, and they went to work together. They checked Michael's statement because it often happens that the husband is involved in the disappearance or death of his wife. Meanwhile, they organized a search party. The media reported Jessica's disappearance and asked everyone who had any information to contact the police. 2 days had passed since the woman's disappearance, and the police hadn't had any new leads. To find out if Jessica had reached her mother's house, detectives started looking for surveillance cameras on her way. There was only one road leading to her mother's house, and next to it was an Exxon gas station that, of course, had surveillance cameras. If Jessica was going where she said she was, she should have appeared on the recording from this camera. Watching the video, the detectives saw Jessica's car driving around 12:56 p.m. It was only a few minutes from the gas station to her mother's house, and since the fax machine wasn't working, she had to drive back soon. Looking through the recording to see if her car drove in the opposite direction, the officers saw something strange. Just 14 minutes later, the car reappeared in the footage, speeding in the direction where the police later found it. The way Jessica drove was peculiar. She could have driven straight, but instead, she turned toward the gas station and, without stopping, drove onto the road on the other side. Next, she went to the city center, where she later left the car in a parking lot. The only logical explanation was that Jessica was in a hurry, and there was a red traffic light at the intersection. So she drove through the gas station to end up on another road where the light was green. After that, she left the car in the parking lot, where a police officer found it later. Rewatching the footage of Jessica leaving her car, the investigators noticed something new. Jessica's height was 5'4", and her weight was 130 pounds, but the person who exited the car was much taller and heavier. Knowing the height of Jessica's car, the experts determined the person's height was between 5'11" and 6'3". While examining the abandoned car, the police discovered that the driver's seat was as close to the steering wheel as possible. This position would have been uncomfortable for someone over 5'11" to sit behind the wheel. However, the police believed that after exiting the car, the person bent down and moved the seat closer to the steering wheel to make it look like Jessica had been driving. But who was this tall person? As it turned out, Michael's height was around 6 feet. The police invited him for questioning. He stated that he was not involved in the disappearance of his wife, whom he claimed to love very much. As before, he said he was at work when the kindergarten staff called him. Detectives interviewed Michael's colleagues and reviewed the geolocation of his phone on the day of Jessica's disappearance. He wasn't lying. Michael was at work when his wife disappeared, meaning it wasn't Michael on the recording. It was the 4th day since Jessica's disappearance. It's hard to imagine the stress her children were experiencing. Their life wasn't the same, and the search continued without yielding any results. Rewatching the recording of someone getting out of Jessica's car, the investigators puzzled over who it could be. Once again, they noticed something new. A minute after the unknown person disappeared behind the building, a white SUV, presumably a Ford, left the scene. Jessica's stepfather, Greg, matched the height description and owned the same car. The police asked Greg to come to the station for questioning. The man was shocked to become a suspect in his stepdaughter's disappearance. According to him, he left his car for repair at a service center, and a neighbor brought him there to pick it up. After that, he went to the Exxon gas station to eat something, the same gas station that provided the police with the CCTV footage. However, after reviewing the footage again, investigators saw Greg driving past the Exxon gas station 2 minutes after leaving the parking lot. He didn't stop there to have lunch, and it turned out that Greg had lied. But could the man Jessica called her father have been involved in her disappearance? After speaking with Greg's neighbor, the the detectives discovered that she did not drive him to the service center. This meant Greg's entire story was a lie. Putting all the facts together, the investigators concluded that Greg was at home when Jessica arrived to send the fax. Maybe something happened, and Greg drove Jessica's car to the parking lot in the city center. A group of police officers went to the man's house. Jessica's mother, Dana, allowed the police to inspect the house. One of the officers immediately went to the fax machine and discovered that Greg had lied about it not working. Moreover, the device's usage history confirmed Jessica did send that fax. Therefore, she was in her parents' house on the day of her disappearance. A trash can in the basement contained napkins with traces of blood. Greg's home shoes, found in a dumpster on the street, also had dry blood on them. Dana told the police that Greg had called the garbage company the day before and asked them to pick up the trash. She hadn't given it much thought at the time, but now she remembered that the trash can wasn't full yet. Most likely, that's how Greg got rid of the evidence, namely the products and rags he used to clean the house. The police interrogated Greg again. They informed him they knew all his statements were false and that they had found evidence in his house. They also mentioned they knew Jessica was in his house on the day of her disappearance. After that, Greg started talking. Gregory Graff, or just Greg, told investigators that he came home on the afternoon of November 21st and found Jessica's car in the driveway and blood stains on the carpet. According to him, she was already dead when he returned home. He said he panicked and was afraid to call the police because he knew no one would believe him. He drove Jessica's car to the parking lot in the city center and then returned home. According to Graff, Jessica owed someone money, and that was the reason she died. This story was another lie by Gregory Graff. Detectives discovered that the day before Jessica disappeared, Graff bought adult toys. Tired of listening to Graff's nonsense, they directly asked him where he had put his stepdaughter's body, saying that an autopsy would give answers to many questions. Realizing he was caught, Graff changed his testimony again. He said he was at home that day, watching adult videos when Jessica arrived and asked if she could send a fax. She was using the computer, and Graff was standing behind her. According to him, he was aroused and desired his stepdaughter. Without saying a word, he pulled out a gun and shot her in the back of the head. He then moved Jessica's body to the bedroom and drove her car to a parking lot in the city center. His Ford was standing near the car service where he had left it earlier for minor repairs, which was why he went there after getting out of Jessica's car. He moved the seat so everyone would think she was behind the wheel. His following words shocked the investigators. When he returned home, he turned on the video camera and placed it near the bed. Then, in his words, he shot a video of his contact with his stepdaughter, although Jessica was already dead. The police later found this video on Greg's computer. According to him, he wrapped her body in a blanket and hid it in a ravine near his house, after which he returned home and began cleaning. Graff said in the interview that he wished he could get help. "I'm not really a bad guy," Graff told Pennsylvania State Police Corporal Jeffrey Smith. "I just lost my mind." After his confession, he talked about how his world changed after the crime. "I lost everything," Graff said. "My business, my home in Florida, my dogs, my wife." Then he mentioned his family and parents, but never once spoke about the loss of Jessica. Thus, Danielle simultaneously found out that her daughter was dead and that her husband was the one who did it. What Greg had done to the body was beyond the woman's imagination. After Graff's arrest, the authorities issued an official statement. "Unfortunately, we have sad news to announce today. Jessica Padet is deceased. She is the victim of a homicide," said Northampton County District Attorney John Morganelli. "We still are a little bit hesitant to buy into the version of events that were given to us by the defendant, but we have reason to believe there was a sexual motive in this whole matter." Morganelli said the prosecutor's office examined all the evidence to determine whether Graff had planned the attack. Through a statement released by Pennsylvania State Police, Jessica's family thanked law enforcement, the media, and the public for their efforts. "We are devastated by the loss of Jessica. She was a beautiful, vibrant young woman who was beloved by her family and friends. The world shines less bright today," the statement read. They charge 53-year-old Gregory Graff with taking the life of Jessica Payette. At the stage of the investigation, some suggested that when Jessica arrived, Greg tried to persuade her into intimacy, but when she rejected him, he was afraid of exposure and took her life. However, there was no way to prove it, since Jessica had no defensive wounds on her body. She died from a single wound to the back of the head, which confirmed Greg's testimony. According to the laws of Pennsylvania, the man could face the death penalty. However, since Jessica was dead when he committed the second part of his heinous crime, the prosecutor's office had no right to demand the death penalty for him. After examining Greg and Jessica's computers and phones, the police did not find any evidence of a connection between them beyond the typical relationship of stepfather and stepdaughter. The trial began in 2015. District Attorney John Morganelli said Philadelphia lawyer John McMahon Jr. never filed the results of any mental health evaluation for Gregory Graff. McMahon said he had Graff evaluated for a possible insanity defense, but Graff did not have diminished mental capacity, so McMahon didn't use the evaluation at trial. Danielle Bittner said she found out about her daughter's disappearance on November 21st while she was in Florida choosing carpets for her new home. When Graff picked her up at Lehigh Valley International Airport on November 22nd, he said it would be okay. They'd find her. At one of the court sessions, the jury had to watch a 6-minute video of Greg's heinous crimes, where he used the adult toys he had bought the day before. Although the jury didn't want to watch the video, the judge said they were obligated to do so before reaching a decision. Graff's lawyer tried to prove that it wasn't a planned crime and that his client had committed a third-degree crime, not first-degree. However, Northampton County District Attorney John Morganelli made the difficult decision to show the jury the 6-minute video recording filmed by Graff. Morganelli said Graff pleaded not guilty to both charges, leaving him no choice but to present all the evidence in his arsenal to convince jurors the crime was premeditated. The Commonwealth needed to show you what he did, Morganelli said in his closing argument. It wasn't pleasant. It wasn't tasteful, but we needed to show you what he did. It took the jury just 6 minutes to reach an unanimous decision. They found Gregory Graff guilty of taking Jessica's life and abusing her body. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment without parole. Asked by the judge if he had anything to say, Graff said, "No, sir. I'm just very sorry." After sentencing, the judge recommended that the jury seek counseling from a psychologist. After the verdict, Jessica Payette's husband, Michael, said, "It's been tough moving on without the only woman I ever loved and raising 3 children without her. She was the most wonderful person you'd ever meet," he told reporters. Danielle filed for divorce. However, there were difficulties, and she had to go to court. 55-year-old Gregory Graff, who appeared in court through a video feed from his Pennsylvania prison cell, refused to sign documents giving him 25% of his share assets with Danielle.